demonstration, I want to show you how to properly remove and reinstall your engine cooling head on your Alpha engine. First thing you want to do is make sure your space that you're working with is very clean. You do not want to get any dust or dirt into your engine while you're disassembling it. First step, we're going to remove the glow plug and set aside. And then we will remove the 4 cooling head screws. Do this in a diagonal fashion. And once you have these screws loose, the cooling head should pop off very easily. And set the screws in the head aside. And then you have the head button, and you can see there's a little notch that Alpha has made here. This notch always goes forward. This makes sure that you always have the head button on the same direction every single time. So to remove the head button, kind of rock it back and forth, and it'll come loose. And then you must note that you have gaskets on here as well, or shims, however you like to call them. Remove those. And that is how you disassemble the cooling head off of your engine. Now to reassemble it, you're going to want to inspect your gaskets to make sure there is no creases, no dents, nothing that's going to impede the seal that it's going to create for your engine. So these look good, so I'm going to make sure also that your head button is very clean. If you've been running, a lot of times you'll have dirt around the outside, so you want to clean that up. Clean the head button here. Clean it in the glow plug hole, and just make sure it's completely clean. We're going to install the gaskets on the head button, and putting the head button back into the cylinder. Make sure that your groove is towards the front. About to done. And next we're going to reinstall the cooling head. Make sure the cooling head also is clean. Use a clean cloth for that. And then I like to put the screws in first. You can do it after you set the head on, your choice. Screws there. And line up the screws in the holes. And you're going to just tighten these 4 screws in a diagonal pattern again, just enough to where they just start to snug up a little bit. Diagonal pattern from each other. It's very important when you're tightening the engine screws. So they're just enough. Now I'm going to twist the cooling head a little bit to seat it properly. You want to get the best seal you possibly can get. And then I'm going to use a torque wrench at 6 kilograms per centimeter. And I'm going to do this in a diagonal fashion again. One. Next, set your torque wrench to 14 kilograms per centimeter. Now I realize that many people do not have a torque wrench. If that's the case, you just have to know not to crank down on it with all your might. Do this in a diagonal fashion. The head button and the head can be deformed if you're a gorilla man and you over tighten it too much. So I will show you in a second. After we do this at the 14 kilograms per centimeter, that's the optimum tightness that you want your cooling head. If you do not have that, what I've been shown is to basically use your fingertips and kind of tighten as much as you can, but don't grip it with your whole hand and turn it, as that can deform the head, deform the aluminum, and it'll ruin your seal. So lastly, we're going to reinstall the glow plug. Your first movement when you set this in here will be counterclockwise to seat the threads, and then you'll turn it clockwise slowly until it snugs and tightens up. And there you have properly uninstalled and reinstalled your cooling head on your Alpha Plus engine. to show you how to properly remove and reinstall your backplate. Now here we have a cross section of an engine. You can clearly see here that in the bottom of the stroke, the piston skirt goes into the back of the backplate. So this is very important to note, and before you ever take off your backplate, you want to be sure that your piston is in the upper half of the stroke. So we're going to demonstrate that on our engine. So first things first, turn the piston so it's in the upper half of the stroke, and then remove the 4 screws in a diagonal pattern. Once the screws are removed, check one more time to make sure you're at the top of the stroke. And we're there, so kind of twist. There's a good seal on there. Pop it loose. And there you have your backplate. And then you can see when the piston's up in the upper half of the stroke, you can clearly see that it's completely, the skirt is out of the way and is not going to go into the back of the backplate. So when we reinstall, you must also make sure that the piston is in the upper part of the stroke, because if you don't, you can risk damaging your piston. That would not be good. So again, piston upper half of the stroke. Now we're going to reassemble. Backplate on, push in, and then we're going to tighten the 4 screws in a diagonal fashion. For now, just going to make each one until it just starts to snug up a little bit, and then we're going to use a torque wrench. Very important again not to over tighten these screws either, as it can deform the aluminum, ruin the seal, create an air leak, and you do not want that. So, we have our torque wrench, and it is set at 8 kilograms per centimeter. And again, in a diagonal fashion, tighten each one. And now if you don't have a torque wrench, again, just kind of use your fingers. Pretty much 2 fingers and a thumb at your fingertips is about as tight as you want to do it. If you go any more, if you grip it, you risk deforming the aluminum, and you don't want to do that. So that is how you properly uninstall and reinstall the backplate of your Alpha Plus engine. For this demonstration, I want to show you the purpose of the carburetor. The carburetor is one of the most critical parts on an engine. The carburetor controls how much power, how much fuel and air is getting to your engine as you're running it. So here we have a cross-cut diagram of a carb. You have 3 main needles on the carburetor. You have your main speed needle, your idle screw, and your low speed needle. Your low speed needle is set inside the throttle slide. So when you pull throttle, the throttle slide and the low speed needle move in conjunction together. Here we have a diagram of your throttle slide at idle mode. You can see that you're only allowing a small amount of air and fuel into the engine at that time, which is how it idles. Now, at high speed mode, when your throttle is fully applied and the throttle slide is fully open, you're allowing the maximum amount of air, fuel being mixed to create your mixture, and that's full power for your engine. Now, things to look for when you are mounting up your carburetor on your engine. First, this is to tighten your carburetor, this screw. So first you want to set your carburetor in your car, depending on, it's very dependent on your car, and you want to make sure all clearances are good. For instance, at full throttle, a lot of times the carburetor boot will touch the brake discs. So you want to make sure that all clearances are clear, nothing is interrupted. You want to be able to get to every single needle with ease. So just take all that into account. When that is set and in your car, you can push down on your carburetor and you can snug up your carburetor bolt. Now don't do this too tight as you can deform the carburetor base. Snug that up, and so that is set. And you can also adjust your main speed needle, the fuel inlet, depending on how your fuel line is routed. You can move it around here, up where it's at right here, so it's all car dependent. Also, on the carburetor ball here, you can adjust that for your throttle and where it attaches to your linkage. You want to make sure that your linkage is completely straight and pulls this at a straight line. This will allow this not to damage your slide, where if you're pulling at an angle, it can cause it to stick during running and damage it. So you want to pull as smooth and straight as possible. And so that is the basic premise of what a carburetor is, what a carburetor does, and how to adjust it into your car. For this demonstration, I want to describe what is happening inside the carburetor when the engine is running. As the fuel enters the main needle and goes into the carburetor, it must go through a process of atomization. This process happens when the fuel entering the main needle mixes with the air coming in through the venturi. This mixture is called the air-fuel mixture. In general, you would hear the terms rich or lean used to describe this mixture. If the engine is running too rich, it means that the air-fuel mixture value is lower, meaning more fuel than air. Whereas the engine is, if it's running lean, it means that the air-fuel value is higher, more air than fuel. This air-fuel ratio is very important to engine tuning. If tuned too lean, it will allow the engine to overheat and flame out, and can also cause glow plug to burn out easily. If the tune is too rich, you will have high fuel consumption, and the engine will not have the power that it should have. So now to explain how to get a good tuning, we first need to explain the construction of a carburetor using this 3D animation. The ratio of the air-fuel mixture is tuned through the throttle valve, the main speed needle, and the low speed needle. At first, you can see from the structure of the carburetor that the central portion is hollow. Air will go quickly through this hollow area and pass through the fuel nipple where fuel is being supplied by the main needle. And this fuel and air will mix together, which creates the atomization process. Now we are going to introduce the carburetor function and its construction. We have prepared a computer animation of the carburetor to have a good understanding of what changes occur with the fuel as we adjust the main and low speed needles. First, look at the main needle. Note that the fuel will first pass through the main needle and then enter the carburetor. You can say that the main needle is used to limit the maximum amount of fuel when the throttle is fully open, and via the appropriate atomization effect will allow the engine to have the largest power output. Next, look at the action of the throttle slide and the low speed needle. When the throttle is being worked, we can see that the throttle slide and the low speed needle move simultaneously. The low speed needle mainly controls the fuel flowing, while the throttle slide controls the air flowing. Notice that the action of the low speed needle is dependent on the throttle being applied. When the throttle is neutral or slightly pulled, the low speed needle limits the total amount of fuel coming out of the main needle and allows a certain proportion of fine tuning. Finally, we have the idle adjustment screw. Use the screw to keep the engine from flaming out. Turn the screw to the right clockwise to increase the RPMs, and turn the screw to the left or counterclockwise to reduce the RPMs. For this demonstration, I would like to show you how to properly uninstall and reinstall your sleeve, piston, rod, and crankshaft. So first, for the sleeve, you can simply insert your finger, get a little bit of pressure, and pull it out. Do not use any sharp objects or anything that could possibly damage the sleeve, as this will hinder the performance of your engine. Now, to remove the piston and the rod, you want to move your crankshaft to the top dead center position, and then you're going to insert one finger underneath the bottom of the rod and the other one at the top of the piston. Pull back with your finger underneath the rod, and then your piston can slide right off. And then for the crankshaft, you're simply going to push it out through the back of the engine. And that is simply the removal part. Now, one thing to check if you've been running your engine for a while is to make sure that your crank pin is of appropriate size. Use digital calipers for that. Now, you want to make sure that it's above 4.92. Here, this one's at 4.91. Now, Alpha suggests that if it's below 4.92, you want to replace your crankshaft. Because if you continue to run it, it could cause your piston to break, it could cause a knock in the engine, and it can cause your glow plugs to malfunction prematurely. So always take a look at that after you've ran for a while, just to make sure. Now, for the reassembly part, for the crankshaft first, you want to lubricate it with a good engine oil. You want to put it onto the crank pin and around the two areas that the crankshaft runs on the bearings. So we're going to add a little bit of oil, and then you can move it around with your finger to make sure you cover all that area. And then to insert it, simply push it back through the bearings. Make sure it's pressed all the way in. And there it's set. Now you're ready to do the rod and the piston next. Now there's two ways to know which way the rod goes in and the piston. One is the rod has a very small little oil hole in the front. Now this oil hole goes towards the front of the engine. Also, the piston has the skirt here. This goes towards the back of the engine because this is what goes down at bottom dead center into the backplate. So to insert this, we're going to want to turn the crankshaft to the top dead center position. We're going to insert the piston and the rod through the top of the engine. And then we're going to reach in and kind of pull the bottom of the rod out and set it over top of the crank pin, like so. And now your piston and rod are seated properly. Now we want to go to bottom dead center to insert the sleeve. So things to note on the sleeve before you insert it. There's a small little pin in the case, and there's a small little notch on the sleeve. You want these to line up properly. Also, oil the sleeve on the outside and inside a little bit, just to make sure you're not putting the engine together dry. Also make sure that if you have been running for a while, if any of these components are dirty, if there's anything dirty, use a towel to clean off the inside, the sleeve, the piston, all of it. Make sure everything's clean, and then well oiled when you put it together. Now that you have your piston and rod at bottom dead center, it is time to insert the sleeve. So we're going to insert the sleeve, and noting the notch and the pin in the case, start to push the sleeve in slowly. Once you get it in a little bit, you can put your finger at the bottom of the piston to kind of guide it into the sleeve. As you slowly push the sleeve down, it's on there, and then you line up the pin and the notch. Seat the sleeve in. And then you turn your crankshaft slowly, just to make sure that you have free, smooth movement. And that is it. That is how you uninstall and reinstall your sleeve, piston, rod, and crankshaft. For this demonstration, I want to show you how to properly install your Alpha Plus clutch. First things, we have the aluminum clutch shoe, which is a new design for Alpha. They have a patent-pending hollow pin that goes through the clutch here. Now this design is thought to isolate most of the heat from the shoes to prevent the springs from generating heat exhaustion. But it can also reduce the friction resistance between the springs and the clutch shoes. Also, Alpha has a newly designed flywheel. A couple different functions of the flywheel are, for one, it's very lightweight. Also, it's been designed to have good cooling and scrap removal of the material that comes off the shoes through wear. So now we're going to install the clutch onto the engine. First thing you want to do is install the flywheel collet. Next is the flywheel itself, and then the clutch nut. For that, you're going to want to use a flywheel tool to hold the flywheel, or you can also use big pliers if you have them, if that's all that you have, if you don't have a flywheel tool. Tighten this up really good because you do not want this coming undone during a race. Okay. Next step that you want to do is put on the little shims that'll go underneath the clutch shoes. So place that on all 3 flywheel pins. Okay. Your next step is to install the clutch spring into the clutch shoe. The long end of the spring will go up towards that hollow pin. And then you will start to put that onto one of the flywheel pins. And you can use Alpha's special clutch tool. Twist it back, which moves the spring up out of the way. Bring the tool down, press it down, snaps in, and you want to make sure that the spring is into the clutch groove. And then you will repeat this with the other 2. Again, clutch spring onto clutch shoe, onto flywheel pin, use the tool, pull the spring back, use the tool to press it down. And like this one, you see it's not quite seated into the groove yet, so you can use the tool again to press down on the spring the rest of the way. Make sure that it's properly seated into the groove. And the last one, which is the hardest one, simply because you have to pull back on the shoe a little bit to get this on to the flywheel pin. Let's see, how can we do this and show you? Easy way to do this. Go back a little. Get the shoe on there. So, kind of hard to show on camera, sorry for that. But, same process again. Use the clutch tool to pull the spring back. Press it down. Make sure that the spring is into the groove of the clutch nut. And there you have all your shoes and springs installed onto the clutch. Now next step, you're going to shim and put on your clutch bearings and clutch belt. So here, this is very car dependent. Every car is going to be a little bit different on how many shims you're going to want to use and where you want to use them. Some cars you're going to want to put the shims on first, as that'll put the clutch bell teeth out a little bit further. Some of them you'll want to put the shims on last, so it'll put the teeth out a little bit, not as far out, and that's kind of going to depend on where your center diff spur gear is and where your engine mount is, so it's very car dependent. So it might take some trial and error at first. But here we're going to put the shims on first, then a bearing, install the clutch bell, another bearing, and then we're going to put the screw with a washer on it to make sure it holds everything in. Tighten that up. Another important thing to note is that when that is tight, you're going to want about 3 to 5 tenths of play back and forth. This will ensure that once everything heats up, it doesn't expand too much and lock up. So you want a little bit of play. Make sure everything spins freely. And that is how you properly install your Alpha Plus clutch. For this demonstration, I want to show you how to properly oil your air filter. Now, an air filter is an extremely important part of nitro racing. This is what allows air into your engine and allows it to be clean air and not dirty air. The last thing you want is dirt in your engine, as it will cause damage to everything inside of it, and your engine will not last nearly as long or perform as well. So you want to make sure that you're always looking at your air filter to make sure that it's clean. If it gets dirty, you need to change it, clean it, replace the oil, replace the filter. It's extremely, extremely important. So what we do is simply, you can use a bag, you can do it in your hands if you don't mind getting messy, but we're going to do it in a bag here. Get a nice high quality air filter oil. Get it all in there and just mix it all up together. Get that oil throughout the entire filter, inside and out. Now, depending on what kind of track you race at, say you run at a track that's very loamy dirt, a lot of loose dirt, you're going to want a good even coating of oil on the inside and the outer filter. Now, if you run on a track that's like Blue Groove and there's not much dust, it's very possible you can just oil the inner and not oil the outer, as this will allow the engine to breathe better. But how I normally do it myself for most tracks is I'll oil the inner first with the full amount, and then I'll put a dry outer on it and then squeeze the outer on top of the inner that's already been oiled, just to kind of get an even coating on the inside of it. But to be safe, the best way is to oil the inner and outer the same amount. This will keep your engine as clean as possible. And so get a nice even coating. You don't want too much though. If you have too much, the oil itself can actually leak into the engine, causing damage as well. So a nice even coating, not too much, not too little. Squeeze out the excess if there is any. And then you'll place that onto your filter and onto your engine. So always make sure this is clean. Extremely important if you want your engine to last a long time. And that is how you properly oil an air filter. For this demonstration, I want to show you how to know if your engine is ready to have a race tune put on it. First thing you want to do, after you've done your 10 tanks of braking at a rich setting, is take the engine out of your car, remove the glow plug, and then let it cool down completely. And then you're going to take a torque wrench, set it at between 2.8 and 3.0 kilograms per centimeter. Next, take a torque wrench, insert it into the end of the crankshaft and the screw, and turn it slowly. Now this one turned over. That means it's less than the 2.8 to 3.0 kilograms per centimeter. Thus, this engine is broken in and ready for a race tune. Now say you take your engine, do the same process, and the torque wrench goes off. That means the engine is still too tight. You need to go back and do another 3 tanks of braking, and then repeat this process until it turns over with no issue. And that is how you know if your engine is ready for a race tune.